All right. Welcome to the January 25th, 2023 Commission Special Meeting. At this point in time, I would call the meeting to order, and I would ask Travis Laster to do the moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on our agenda is review and approval of the agenda. Is there any additions or changes? Seeing none, I'd look for a motion for approval.
So move. Second.
Moved by Lassiter, seconded by Drews. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 5, Commission Work Session. Item number A, Planning Office Staffing and Responsibilities. Brittany Moulton.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brittany Molitor, Planning Director. We just wanted to give an update to the Commission of kind of our structure of our department. Because, with some of the things with the changes with the Compensation Committee and things like that, we've structured our office in a way that kind of prevents coming and doing these out-of-class requirements. We've created basically a career path for all the planners. So they can start at an entry-level position and work their way up. And that's where you see, on the flow charts, the different steps that they have to do. All of them have different requirements for certifications, for just education and just general planning knowledge. But we just wanted to update the commission on kind of how we go through that and how there is actually a career path in hopes to maintain and retain employees to give them something to work towards. With that, we are looking at, and I'll let Jason speak to it because he kind of is on that side of it with the building inspector. We're looking at doing a similar pathway for the building inspector because right now we just have one position. But with some of the things that have come up with reviewing some of these commercial buildings, with the limited availability of Jerome Harvey, our fire administrator, to review these and having help with some of these plans. So I'll let Jason kind of talk about the building inspector and what we're proposing of adding those positions. So.
Jason Thedison, Assistant Planning Director. Yeah, so that was one of the pieces that we were lacking was the building inspector side of things. We had tackled like Brittany said, the planner side of things, but then for the building inspector, we wanted to have them have that career path as well. So what I've done is researched a lot of the ICC requirements through IBC and building code and things like that. So kind of tailored these 3 positions, whereas the assistant would have kind of basic knowledge of construction and home building, be able to do our initial and final inspections. And as they progress up, they would have to get the International Residential Code certifications to become a building inspector or residential building inspector. And as they progress up, ultimately what we'd like to see them is a plans examiner so they could review commercial building.
What is ICC?
International Code Council, sorry.
Thank you.
Threw a lot of acronyms at you. But yeah, eventually we'd like to see them as a senior building inspector be able to do the plans examiner and take some of that workload off of Jerome, because he does a lot of our NFPA, National Fire Protection Agency, reviews for residential fire sprinklers or commercial.
Okay. Glad Ms. Hancock asked that. As I was looking at this, reviewing this yesterday, a lot of these positions aren't built, so are you planning out for in the future from the looks of this structure, because you got under the senior building inspector, you got 3 positions. This is for the future?
So that doesn't necessarily, these are more spaces than faces at this point. So this is a career path for David Grindle. He's our building inspector now. So if he wanted to progress higher in his position, that this would be his path to do so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if we adopt more stringent building inspections, in the future, building code requirements, we would have someone in place to do that. Because this is, a new position, a newer position. We just started, reviewing structures and reviewing plan sets. So it's just, moving towards the future more and trying to retain and keep current staff in their positions because the knowledge base, there's a huge learning curve in planning. So the more that we can keep, current staff and give them a career path, that's our intent.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Roskinek?
Brittany, is it possible that, this layout's really nice, but could you put a sheet together that would show your employees, their name and what they do, what their position is and how long they've been with the county so that I can integrate better with your department, because that's the one that we come face to face with the most, just like to know the people better.
okay, so like what's on the rear page and
I
then
guess I didn't
actually
see
put
that.
like a name with it? And, because these
Yeah,
are the kind of the job
something like that,
duties.
yeah.
Okay. I just didn't want to put the names necessarily in a public packet, I guess, so, but we can certainly do that for the commission. So if there's any questions with that, any other questions?
Doesn't look like it.
All right, so we can go to our next, I'll just go up here in the next slide. Our special permitted use process. So this was a section of the ordinance that was added back in November of this year. And the intent of the special permitted use process was to make it simpler for applicants to do certain uses that we see all the time that were originally conditional uses. Living in an RV while you build a house, temporary structures, public service structures, things like that. Why this is coming up and why we wanted to kind of discuss it and understand it is because moving into the next item, the Vacation Home Rental Committee is recommending that vacation home rentals be these special permitted uses. So we just wanted to discuss the process with the commission so they understand when we're going through the vacation home rental and what the Vacation Home Rental Committee was recommending, what this process looks like, because it's an internal process. There's pretty stringent criteria. If they meet check all the boxes, essentially it's an administrative approval by Jason or myself. Outside of that, if there's neighbors or anyone that have concerns with these special permitted uses, because it is an administrative decision, they would have to appeal it to the Board of Adjustment. So then there could still be a hearing by the neighbors. So it's not an end-all be-all as far as our office approving these uses. There's still an avenue for people to go in front of the Board of Adjustment to voice concerns on these special permitted uses. We've gotten 2 applications so far. One was for an accessory structure. I know some of you have seen those, in the planning commission or their conditional use permits. That process is, 4 to 6 weeks, where this is 2 to 3 week process. So it's a much faster process. It's an administrative process. So we're hoping this will, some of those simpler requests that frankly, the planning commission never denied. These accessory uses, these temporary uses, so. But this is kind of the process, meeting with staff and going through these administrative. They do have to notify their neighbors, just their abutting neighbors by first-class mail, so that they are aware, the neighbors, but it's just the abutting neighbors, it's not the 500 feet.
Mr. Chair.
So,
Mr. Roskinek?
Brittany, could you give me a few examples of the short-term uses and accessory structures? And I'm assuming an accessory structure would be anything larger than 144 square feet, but what would be a few examples that wouldn't be like a garage or, a mother-in-law unit? It'd be just looking for some examples on that.
typically, the accessory structures are like a garage before a house in a residential district. So if you see it where people own like maybe one lot where their house is on, they own the adjacent lot, but they don't want to put another house there, but they want to put like a storage building or a Morton building. because there isn't a principal use, which would be the single-family residence in a residential district, they would have to go through the conditional use permit process to have the accessory as the principal use. So this would require them to still get a special permitted use, but they don't have to go through the conditional use permit process, which is pretty onerous. So,
Okay, how about the short term then? What would be a couple examples of that?
short-term uses are living in an RV by building a house. What was one of the other ones that we just had?
Anybody wanting to use a recreational vehicle, right?
Yeah.
Less than 180 days.
That one, or if it's, let's
Well,
say.
the one that I'm thinking up on Highway 16 last year, they wanted to put that tent and do, would that be an
That would be
example?
a temporary use, anything that's under 180 days,
Okay,
so.
You know?
Yeah.
I like this process for the simple fact that if they meet all the requirements and surrounding residents have a concern, they can appeal it, which at that point in time, when they come for the hearing, the applicant and the people know what's happening, that it's an appeal. I've seen a lot of times where people have gone through the process and they thought things were going good, and then until they showed up to the meeting, and then there was, people that weren't happy that they never knew was happening. At least this is a clear step form for that, for both parties, I would say.
Chairman.
Ms. Hancock?
So when you approve them, then how do you know in the future? You guys just show that they had before accessory structures, or they have accessory structures as they come out and they want to do something different on that parcel?
It would be just like it is now, where the conditional use permit shows up as attached to that parcel. So it would just be an SPU instead of a CUP. These are still reviewed on a regular basis, just like a conditional use permit, except for it's just reviewed by staff.
So you're,
versus-
sure, so you're making these CUPs through the staff? Is that what you're saying?
Essentially is what they are. They're special permitted uses. There's actually a statute under 11.2 that allows these special permitted uses. So that's,
And if it, go ahead.
it's just an avenue outside of a CUP, but it's kind of in between a conditional use permit and a use by right. So it's kind of in between.
And if it becomes controversial, then there is an appeal process.
Yes.
If they say, okay, Jason and Brittany, we're not okay with this and by us, then it comes to us, or it comes to the planning commission?
It would come to the Board of Adjustment, whoever the who is sitting as a Board of Adjustment, that's who the appeal goes to. There is also a provision in this section of the ordinance, if Jason or I feel that this is not appropriate under a special permitted use, if there is something that, is a little different about this property, we can require them to get a CUP instead of an SPU. So there is some discretion in that if we feel like there's, something with this property or something with the surrounding property that may not fit or may not necessarily check all of the boxes.
I think it's a good process. It leaves it less political, plus it's more about the law, and you guys know the more of the history than a lot of times we do, so I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair,
Asking that.
when it says the applicant provides notice to all adjacent landowners, is that adjacent or is it within 500 feet?
It's just people that are abutting just
Okay.
adjacent. So it's not the 500 feet, so it's just the immediate property owners.
So then that is by a certified letter,
No, I believe it's just
First class.
first-class mail.
okay.
Any further questions, Warren? Was that covering the special permitting and vacation home rentals, or you?
Nope, that was just a special permitted uses.
Okay.
I just wanted to give kind of a back history, so when we go in and discuss the recommendations from the Vacation Home Rental Committee. So the biggest change that this committee, they met for nearly a year. It was a good committee. They didn't always agree. It wasn't I would say it was 5-2 or 4-3 in most cases. So they weren't all in consensus with all of the changes. So there was a lot of good discussion, a lot of things that were brought up. So I think that they did a good job. They, were very respectful to one another during these meetings, even in disagreement. They came up with some different solutions. So I kind of want to give a back history on that. But they are proposing that VHRs go through the special permitted use process. They have developed quite a bit of criteria for these special permitted uses. So all of them have to meet all of those requirements. Otherwise, they would have to go into the conditional use permit process. They still kept the 1 acre minimum requirement. There was a lot of discussion on that. The biggest reason they wanted to keep the 1 acre minimum is there is a lot of concern with people bringing in trailers with ATVs and all of that in the parking. And they felt like maintaining that 1 acre minimum would still give buffers to neighboring property owners, in those instances. They felt if they went smaller than that, those concerns would just, I guess.
Grow.
Yes.
Yeah, those concerns would grow.
Yeah, and they already have significant concerns. They did put some parking limitations in their proposal. So there would only be one parking space per bedroom, and that would include trailers, ATVs, UTVs, vehicles. They felt that that seems to be some of the biggest complaints, is about parking in trailers. And I know Deb was on the planning commission on Monday. That was the VHR that was on the agenda. That was one of the biggest concerns, is all of the trailers and the UTVs. So that seems to be one of the items of concern. So that's how the committee is proposing to address that, is having some parking limitations. So there are 5 or 10 trailers of UTVs and ATVs. And they are proposing the requirement for liability insurance. We do have that requirement for our contractors, for your septic installers, and for our contractors licensing. There wasn't a minimum amount determined. I know that there's been some comments and some concerns about that. So that'll be discussed during the planning commission hearings. The planning commission did set a hearing date, a special hearing date for the first reading of that ordinance, and I believe that is February 15th from 4 to 6. It's on a Wednesday afternoon, so they set a special hearing date for the first reading. Their intent is just to hear testimony. They're not going to make any changes. They're just going to take in testimony.
Question.
Yes.
So for the liability insurance, is that the business has to have liability insurance for that? As a separate business in and of itself, they can't have their own homeowners insurance that's willing to cover it. They have to have a separate one for the business technically.
Correct. So it's
We
separate.
don't require that right now?
Hmm?
We don't require that?
We do not.
Businesses don't I'm just wondering, I guess, if you have a business, I guess it's not required then, is it?
Well, we don't require it as part of the application process. Their mortgage companies or their, LLCs or whatever, they may have it already. I know some of them do. A couple of the people that sat on the committee that actually have vacation home rentals, they already have it. But we just don't have it as a requirement as far as an application and
Gotcha.
submittal. So that is, and then the other big one is they are going to require, or they're recommending biannual licensing, meaning that every 2 years they would have to re-up their, basically a license. So these vacation home rentals, instead of being like a conditional use permit, they're actually going to be an SPU, and it's actually going to be a license through the county. So every 2 years, they'll have to submit, do the review, and then pay the licensing fee. And one of the other big things too is they really want people to come into compliance. That's the intent. They want, they feel like, half of the people are operating under their conditional use permisses and doing the right things. Then the other half are just doing whatever they want and not getting permits.
So what's the penalty if you're operating without a permit or a license and
They're
whatnot?
proposing $1,500 in addition to double the permit fee.
Already made money off it.
They did propose a grace period once this ordinance goes into effect. That, I think it's within 6 months.
Yeah, like 180 days.
That anybody who's operating illegally can come in, go through the special permitted use process and get their license to operate legally.
If we want them to come into compliance, you got to make it
Right.
painful if they get found out. Okay.
And that's what their intent was, is
Painful Monday.
like, for this 180 days, everybody come in, get permitted, but after that 180 days, then those penalties would come into effect.
So Chairman,
Ms. Hancock.
so these are basically rental units, And we don't make people that rent their houses do any of this, but now we're stringently doing VHRs because people don't want them in their areas. So are we going to limit rental houses too? Are we gonna, I mean, we are 1 acre minimum, parking limitations per bedroom. Some of those are maybe for kids, so we're gonna make them have 6 parking places, and 5 of those might be for kids, and the parents go in the other bedroom. So we're gonna need them to have, you know what I mean, or this is, I don't know, these are rental units. They're VHRs, which I understand, but they're rental units.
Yeah.
So do other states have this kind of stringent rules? I mean, this is more for the neighbors. It's not for the business. So it needs to be business friendly and also, compliant, so they have to understand with the neighbors. But the same neighbors, the same people of rental units probably try to do the same thing to rentals because they don't want rentals. I've seen that in their areas, but they can't restrict it. So a lot of people don't want these rental units, no matter what they are, VHR or rentals in their neighborhoods.
Point of clarification. When you say rental units, not the VHRs, are you talking like
You
if I
rent your
own,
home out
rent your home out for a year at a time? Is that what you're talking about?
3 months or a month or, how long can you rent your home? Can you call them a rental? What requires me to call it a VHR or a rental? Because it's 6 weeks? How about if I just say I'm renting my house out for a month
So in our
each time?
ordinance, we define long-term as over 28 days consecutively.
That's what I'm saying. So I just rent it out every month. And what's the difference?
Mr. Chair.
So just food for thought, because biannual licensing, limitation on parking limitations, 1 per bedroom, prohibited in the floodway. We have pieces of like a corner that's in the floodway, so we say no matter what, because it's got a little piece or a corner in the floodway. 1 acre minimum. And what I'd like to know, how many we have now that even comply with this? Do we have 400 of them and 100 comply, or the other 300 don't? That's going to tell me that this ordinance is very restrictive, or it's working very well because there isn't many of these rules that they really have to change because it's happening now.
I would say that most of these are already being met. The 1 acre minimum is already in our ordinance. There's a few VHRs that are under that were grandfathered in when the ordinance went into effect, I believe in like 2012. So there are a few, but most of them that are currently operating that have CUPs, I would say meet these requirements.
So how many do we have, and how many have met these requirements or would meet these requirements would be, for me, the piece that I would like to know, because like I said, we keep changing this, and it keeps getting stringent and more stringent and more stringent, that people need to be able to operate a rental house, basically, and not be restrictive just because neighbors don't want them there. Because this is starting to look like, I don't want it in my neighborhood kind of ordinance, instead of this is just a good idea for Pennington County to make some rules and regulations for it. Does that make sense, board?
Yep.
So,
Hey, Mr. Chair.
I'll do a follow-up and answer some of your questions and of some of my experiences, and I'll explain some of the stuff, but I'll let everybody speak first.
Mr. Chair.
I think Ron was
So
next in
my-
line, then
Relative to the parking spaces, I understand what Deb's saying, but then there are situations where a family, all the kids want to, so 5 brothers and sisters want to get together like what we're going to do. And so we all drive our own car. In that situation, you'd probably you'd want those parking places. You're not going to use them all the time, but in the events where you could possibly have a situation where a family comes in, and when I'm talking about uncles and they're all driving their own cars, you'd probably want enough parking spaces. But my question is relative to the special use or conditional use. Is there conditions with each one of those?
Yes.
They have to meet certain conditions, and normally the last condition is it'll be reviewed in a year on a complaint basis. So my question is, what is a true complaint And if somebody, so you got different types of complaints. It could be a fist fight outside, or it could simply be too much noise and 1 o'clock in the morning. So who do they call? The sheriff will not go to these things.
Right,
Then normally in
so,
the morning, it's all done, but it's still disruptive to the neighbors. So I'm just trying to figure out, does our code enforcement, if can they call him at 1 o'clock and say, look, we got a problem. Tomorrow it won't be here because it'll be resolved. That's my concern.
so the committee actually discussed this at length about that, and really it's the operator. Most of them have a manager or them themselves that have a way to be in contact. That's really who you need to contact. The other option is there's one gentleman that operates them, and he actually has cameras all around. So he knows, I mean, not interior, but exterior. So he knows if there's too many people there. I mean, and he's actually discussed about how he's gone there and told them to leave. So I mean, there's different avenues to do it, but really it ultimately is up to the responsibility of the operator to do that. As far as the complaints, our ordinance enforcement works on substantiated complaints. To be honest, most of the VHRs, we don't get a lot of complaints on them. The most complaints that we get are that they don't have permits, that they're operating without a permit. That's the majority of our complaints. And it's usually because they noticed that there was one time, more trailers with ATVs or something like that, or somebody trespassed because they weren't quite aware of where the boundaries were. It isn't anything like terrible. Most of the time, those things are addressed pretty quickly and resolved. But most of his complaints about VHRs are the fact that they're operating them without permits.
I believe part of the notification process for these as well is to these adjacent landowners that the local contact information be provided as well. So they'll always have that direct line to that local contact if there are problems on that
So
property.
they have the local contact. Could we also add the email to your department so they could go right to your department? Whether it's a good, or a complaint or just a comment that they'd want to just reach out to the county.
Sure, I don't think that would be a
Yeah, I
problem.
mean, we can add that into because they have, under the ordinance proposal, the notification requirements, and that is that the neighbors are notified who their local contact is, so they are aware. There was some discussion about actually putting up signage on the outside of the VHR saying who the local contact was, so in case there were issues, they knew, but I think they backtracked and just went to that notice. So then that way, all of the neighbors within that area had their local contact, so if there were concerns, that would be the person, because really the local contact or the manager or the owner has the most ability to really address those concerns immediately versus our office, especially if it's too many people, loud parties, fires, things like that. Those operators, especially under, with their deposits that they require and all of that, have a lot more, I guess, pull than us filing an ordinance amendment or a revocation hearing and things like that, so.
Okay. Mr. Drews.
Well, Commissioner Roskinek covered part of what I was going to suggest on the VHRs. They're used for different purposes. I mean, so we've stayed in a 4-bedroom unit where we've taken all 4 bedrooms because we had kids and grandkids with us, and we wanted access to the kitchen facility also. And so that was one vehicle in the state of Washington. When we were in Colorado, we stayed again in another 4-bedroom one, but it was just my wife and I, so all we needed was the 1 bedroom. But they were renting out all 4 rooms to different people on different nights. And so they needed to have the adequate parking. This is right on the outskirts of Grand Junction. And so in order to accommodate what they were trying to do, they had to go make arrangements with the local church to use their parking lot for, especially for any kind of extra vehicles, trailers, and et cetera, to park there. So I can see where you can have that dual purpose for VHRs, but I think you need to put that parking in. If they got 4 bedrooms and they could have 4 different groups coming in, and they all are coming in with ATVs and so forth, they need that extra parking, so. And I don't know if that was part of the discussion with the committee or not, but, it may look like overkill sometimes, but at the same time, I think you need to provide for it so that the parking is available, so. That's all I have.
Okay. Mr. Lester.
Couple of questions, and it was after what Commissioner Hadcock had said. If a piece of the property is in the floodway, it's an acre piece of property, and it's not touching a house or the garage and stuff, are we denying them for that purpose? Okay.
It's the
I just,
structure.
only if it's the structure. Okay, that's one of the clarifications I want to make sure was in there. Now, when I read parking limitations, I take it as you're going to limit the number of parking spaces. So if they have 3 bedrooms, it's 3 parking spaces. But if they're on an acre, why would we limit them to 3 parking spaces? They may be able to put 10 parking spaces. I think Commissioner Drews just kind of pointed out, it depends on how many people are coming and going in that area, or if they've got the house, separated. Why would we put is it mainly you have to have this minimum? Is that is it a requirement of a minimum parking space, or are you limiting it only?
It's a maximum.
So they can only have that maximum. So now this is where I'm going to ask the question, because I think, and it kind of goes to what Commissioner Hadcock was talking about. You're right. If we're dealing with somebody who's going to rent a place for 3 months out of the year, whatever, we don't put all these restrictions on them. But if we look at short-term rentals, let's just take hotels for that example. We have to have a minimum amount of parking plus extra. Why would we not say 3? You're not constricted to 3. You have to have 3 plus extra. If we're going to treat them fairly like a short-term rental, we should treat them like we are the hotels. They're having to get a license, they're having to get business insurance. Why wouldn't we allow them more? Why are we restricting them? Maybe that's where I'm missing it. I can kind of understand trying to correlate it to a hotel, where there's requirements for a hotel to have extra parking. Why aren't we doing that here? Are we doing it solely because we want to minimize the imprint in that area? But they're already on an acre of land. That's why I'm kind of confused.
There was quite a bit of discussion about the parking requirements, and it wasn't a consensus on, the parking requirements. The biggest thing was pulling in, the question really went to the ATVs, like pulling in all these trailers of ATVs and things. It wasn't so much like individual cars as far as, 4 different families in 4 different bedrooms or 4 different couples. That wasn't the concern. The concern was the other, recreational type vehicles. That was the concern, the UTVs, the ATVs, pulling in trailers and trailers and trailers of these. That's where the limitation came from.
That's exactly right.
Are you done, Travis?
I'm done. I just kind of want
Okay.
to get clarification on that. I don't know if I'm in agreement of limiting the parking number of spots. If I wanted to put a big parking area so that people can park their ATVs out there, then why not? But, okay.
I'm going to address what Deb said, because I think she's got a good point. When we go back to this adding the renewal every 2 years, right now through the state, with mine, I have to go through a test. They come out and inspect the property every year, check the fire extinguishers, the water tests, access. And so I have to renew that every year. So this seems a little redundant to me you go from every year to all of a sudden every 2 years to paying for another inspection for people to come out. I'm just bringing that up because the state comes out and does that inspection every year, and you have to, make sure you have all your ducks in a row there. To me, it just seems redundant that we're doing it on the county side also. So that's just my 2 cents on that part. Also, I think when we talk about parking spaces, quite frankly, you got 3 bedrooms, you say 3 vehicles, I think that's fine, but we do have a lot of people who come out with their ATVs. I've had them, and a lot of times they don't tell you. So you don't know that they're bringing a trailer. But I advertise that I have parking space for it, so because I have the room. But a lot of other people, you have to do your research to make sure that you save what you have, because it is becoming a big thing these days, coming out with trailers and so forth. Or even, I'll bring one example up. I got an email that somebody's booked in August, and I got some information, so I did some outreach to them, because the company I use does all the back and forth, but I reached out to them because I thought, this seems one from one state and one from another state. Well, one's coming with an RV that wants to park an RV, and another one's coming with ATVs, so if I wouldn't have reached out and talked to them, I would not have known that, but I just wanted to stress, I think Deb's part on the redundancy of the recertification every 2 years just seems redundant to me when you got the state that already has their requirements. But I'm open to the
Mr. Chair.
discussion. I think everybody's talked now. Yeah.
So I guess, how many meetings did you have, the special meetings?
For the vacation home rental committee?
Yeah, on the vacational rentals.
It started out once a week for
3 or 4 months, yeah.
So, I've been in contact with Mr. Tuber and the other gentleman, Bryce Meister or whatever.
Freeze my certain.
And Larry said, we've had 3 months of these meetings, and you've had people that oppose them, you've had people that, you've had both sides, and they've worked together, so I'm just gonna say that this is gonna be the best that it's gonna get, and we can try it, and then if it needs to be modified, we can always change it, but thanks for doing the good work, and I'm good with what we have now.
Chairman.
Ms. Hadcock.
So the main thing is, you said not many complaints on VHRs, but then we just had a committee that went through and talked about VHRs. So to me, I take it as a recommendation from them, but also if we're doing parking, we have vacation home places, tiny home places. They might have 3 bedrooms. Are they gonna have 3 parking spots because they're a vacation home? You're gonna have resorts like Ron's. Does he require, if there's 3 bedrooms, to have 3 parking spots to each one? I don't mean that mean, Ron, I'm just using for example.
No, you're good.
You see what I'm saying? What is different than what Ron's doing than some vacation home rental? Do we require right now that Ron, if he has 3 bedrooms, in his place, that he has 3 parking spots, and he has 6 parking spots if there's 6 bedrooms?
So we already have the minimum parking spot requirement in our ordinance currently.
Okay.
And that's what we apply to the conditional use permits now. The intent behind this addition is to cap the amount of parking spots to get away from too many ATVs, too many vehicles, too many vehicles at the house, and take away from the residential character of the neighborhood is basically, I think, the intent behind that.
Okay, so some of it I see, and some of it, like I said, are we going through the hills and everywhere in Pennington County and saying through resorts to tiny homes to everything that they're all the same? They do have a parking limitation.
We do have a minimum parking requirement
Okay.
in our ordinance right now for everything that we allow. And then this would just add a cap to it in this new proposed ordinance.
Mr. Chair.
So per bedroom, then it has 1 space per bedroom in anything that we do for building houses, rental houses, or resorts, or tiny homes, or RV parks?
It's a minimum. So that's different, like in our ordinance, it's a minimum. This is a maximum. So your minimum is your maximum. Does that make sense?
Tell me what you're saying. So if I have 3
So-
bedrooms, no matter what, I have 3 parking. If I have 6
Right.
bedrooms, I have to have 6 parking.
But in a normal residential, you have to have a minimum of 3, but you could have 5. But in in the vacation home rental, they're saying the minimum is the maximum, so you can have 3, and the most you can have is 3. So,
Well, they're saying parking limitation, 1 space per bedroom.
right.
So
So
if I
the
have
minimum is the
6
So the
maximum,
cap is 3.
right?
Meaning they have to have 3 no matter what?
No, the cap is 3, no more than 3 is
Right,
what
that they
they're
have to
saying.
have 3, but they can't have more than 3.
So the example I just used, Deb, of somebody, I've got 3 bedrooms.
Right.
So if I got 3 people coming, I've got one person who wants to use a motorhome, one's hauling the trailer would be counted as a parking spot, the vehicle would be counted as a parking spot, so I'm maxed. So I couldn't have, if they had one other person come who's gonna stay in the 3rd bedroom, that's a 4th vehicle. They couldn't do it.
Right, because the trailers and the ATVs is a parking spot.
Yeah. So it's the max we're talking about. That's,
Holy crap.
Mr. Chair.
I think, if I remember, if Deb, are you done?
I don't know, I just, I'm just looking how we do rentals and then having someone come and say, okay, first of all, you need a health inspector, which, hey, I think it should be done all the way through so people are living in healthy places. But, and the floodway, that made sense. And I forgot, we did have one person that had a piece of their bedroom or their house or something that was in the floodway and we passed it, I think, if I'm correct. And then I guess I have to look at the situation with ATV and UTVs because it's kind of crazy because the neighbors, if you go in the neighborhood that doesn't want them, they're the first ones that have them parking on the street. Their RVs, their ATVs. In Rapid City, if you drive around, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people, and not that we should have to do it in the county, but they don't have 1 acre land, they have quarter acre land. They have their ATVs and their RVs and their big trucks and stuff right on the street. So, how far do you want to go on restricting people to do a rental in one sense? So, my biggest issue, and I'm with these guys, we had it on Monday, was operating without a permit. We had a couple that do it for a living. They rent all over the states, and they just forgot to renew, or they bought a transferred property, didn't transfer it. Started working in April. The transfer didn't have to be done till October. Through that whole time, didn't even care. And the lady just said on to us, well, there's a lot of people doing this. So my biggest issue is not all these other requirements as much as it is the operating without a permit. I think the fine should be pretty high because that means they're making money. I would see how many months they were operating without the permit, and then I would charge them accordingly what they're charging for the rent. And that's what would be the fine. If it was 3 months, if it was 6 months, if it was 2 years, that should be the fine. There needs to be a penalty big enough if they're making money off something, just like any of the rest of us in commercial or otherwise, they should be fined accordingly. So to me, 1,500 might seem enough in one sense, but the other, how much are they making and how long have they been having the vacation home rental without any permit? That would, I think, stop a lot of these people. Like we said, we would put it out there and be fair to everybody. Come in right now, because what the rules are going to be now is if you get caught operating one, you have to pay the fine of how long you've been operating as a vacation home rental. So
Thanks, Deb.
need stricter rules on that. And the
I'll
other
go
one, I'm
to
good.
Drew's and then Travis.
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the cap on the parking. So, as I can imagine, what they were talking about is VHRs in a residential area of having the cap on it. But not all VHRs are in residential areas. But the cap would apply for those also, as I
Correct.
understand it.
The way it's written right now.
Yeah, and that's where I would disagree with that. I don't know why we would cap it. It's just like with Commissioner LaCroix. I mean, he can accommodate bigger vehicles and trailers and so forth on his property. And I think if they're going to have that number of people, now he doesn't have any. I mean, it's a road in front of his house. It's not a street, so they can't park out on the road. So they're going to have to park on the property. And if he's got, how many bedrooms you got, Lloyd?
3.
So he's got 3 bedrooms. And I mean, it's not unheard of that an RV would pull in, also pulling a trailer with ATVs on them, and that plus he could have a couple other vehicles pulling ATVs. He can accommodate all that on his property, but he would be really over the limit because that would almost count essentially as 6 different.
The way they're proposing.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to point out too, I've stayed in some VHRs and I've been in a 1-bedroom one. I've been in a couple of 2 or 3 bedroom ones, and sometimes those 2 or 3 bedroom ones have bunk beds in there. And the other thing that I've seen or noticed that sometimes crews will come in to do some work and they bring those guys in. Even when I go to a conference, some of us will talk about it and we'll go in on a VHR. It saves us a little bit of money, but we all get a rental car. But there's 5 of us to a 3-bedroom because there's bunk beds in there. So I think that would be disingenuous to say that you got to be capped at 3 when you might have a business meeting that's coming into town for for a weekend, and then saying, well, two of your guests cannot have cars. Well, then what do you do? So I would say that cap is probably a bad thing. I understand a minimum. You need to have minimal parking, but a cap parking when you have an acre at your disposal, I think I'm definitely not for
Mr.
that.
Chair, I guess let's go back to what is a parking space. I mean, a parking space, somebody could sit there and take a flatten out a piece of area, a half an acre in size, and put gravel on it and say, there's a parking space.
Yeah.
For mortar homes. So I guess we have to, what is considered a parking space? And I agree, I don't know that there should be a cap.
By our ordinance, it's a 9 by 18. That's what we consider a space, is one space is 9 foot by 18 foot, essentially. So if you have three, you would have to accommodate, 27 by whatever area to accommodate it. So that's how we look at it.
So they don't have to be contiguous, there's just got to be,
But it does have to be like gravelled and like,
Right,
you
right,
just
right.
can't, like this grassy area over here is parking. It actually has to be like a designated parking area.
so could your parking space be bigger than what you just described?
Yes, yes. That's our minimums in our ordinances is
Yeah.
the 9 by 18. And they can consider inside garages, inside carports. Those are also considered parking areas too. So if you have two spaces in the garage and two spaces outside, that's four, essentially. So you have to keep in mind that if they have garage area for these vacation home rentals, those could be considered parking areas too, if they allow them to park in the garage. I don't think many of them do, but
Yeah.
Does that count against their minimum number?
by our ordinance, it would. Yeah, unless the vacation home rental does not allow it. Most of them don't allow parking, not that I'm aware of. Most of that's their storage area and their personal area.
Well, I think we had some good discussion here, so I think you got a good feeling how this commission's feeling on several different items on the vacation home rental. Is there another meeting with them, or it's coming straight to the planning commission? So you'll have some more discussion, but, so now you know what some of the concerns from this commission
Chairman,
are,
just one thing.
Ms. Haga.
If you guys could, and I don't know if you can, have a map of how many and where they're basically locating. Maybe they're, and 10 in one neighborhood and two normal houses. I mean, that, some of these covenants and some of these other things have to be covering it, but it'd be nice to know, and I would like to go look at some of them, meaning and see if this requirement that we're saying is stringent enough to go, really, we don't really, if it's not many complaints, why are we doing these things? So if you guys maybe could get a map or something that shows, in Pennington County, how many we have and maybe where they're at. I don't know if that's hard or not, but
I think Elevate provided that information to the committee while we were going through this process.
okay.
I want to say that it was 600, something 600.
There was like 600, but that included city limits. We can go on the Airbnb site and see which ones are on there, and then we can tell you which ones are permitted and which ones aren't. We just don't go there. We don't like look for them. We wait until there's actual complaints. So we do know that there's many more out there that aren't permitted. And if I may, Chair, I just want to go back to one comment about the licensing. Currently in our ordinance, it only allows them to have an application to the state when they apply for their CUP. And so sometimes they haven't done their state inspections yet by the time they come in front of the planning commission. The committee doesn't want that anymore. They're going to actually have to have their inspections. Because right now we go out, we go inside, we check for everything. That was one thing we're not doing anymore because they're going to have their state inspection. So we're not going to double up on that anymore. And part of that annual licensing is verifying that they're maintaining their Department of Revenue certificate, that they're maintaining their licenses with the state, that they're passing their state inspections and things like that. So right now, when we go out, we do go inside, we check the fire extinguishers. Now, we won't be doing those types of inspections anymore. Some of the more stringent things, that was a fire, that was one of the things. They did address the dead-end road system, that they will have to have an evacuation plan, an exterior and interior evacuation plan. So they did address some of these other things that will be check boxes for us, but also that they're gonna require the state to do all of their inspections prior to actually applying to us.
So your review, what you're talking about was $100, but to do this every 2 years, I thought I seen some higher numbers.
They did, that's what the committee recommended. They felt like, you know, as a business license, that's what they had recommended.
What,
I mean, that's all.
I want to see it. Was it like 500 or something like that?
I don't recall.
Every
I don't
2 years?
recall. I think it was 500 or 1,000. It was something
Yeah,
like
and you're
that.
talking every 2 years to do what the state's already doing, what you're paying for.
Well,
I'm just saying.
right, and they originally had recommended every year at annual licensing, but the way that the statute is written about special permitted uses and there's a 2-year reference in there. Our state's attorney's office felt like by requiring them to annually license may be in conflict with that statutory requirement for the 2 years, so that's why I went to biannual
Okay.
licensing.
And I'll make one more comment before we move on, was when you come to the minimum, I think that's a great number, because I've seen some properties where the topography of the house, you could barely fit just with 3 on there, so you know what I'm saying? So I do see the minimum, but I think we got to be open as far as the maximum.
Mr. Chair, and this
Mr.
will be
Rez-
my last comment. I think that there's probably 95% of these are operating, they're good operators, and there's a few that aren't, and I agree with Deb, the ones that aren't, those penalties ought to be really stiff, and once there's a penalty, there ought to be, for each day they violate it, there ought to be additional charges. And that's just my 2 cents worth, but I think we really need to focus on the penalties and make sure that people realize if they don't operate the way they're supposed to, there's going to be a stiff penalty.
And that was a lot of comment from the operators that were on the committee because they felt like they were doing the right thing. They were getting their permits, they were operating, they were being transparent in their operations, and then others were not. So that was kind of their feeling and the intent of them. And that's why they wanted to go to the special permitted use versus conditional uses. So it's an easier process. It's a more administrative process. If they're doing all the right things, and checking all the boxes, then they were hoping that that would bring more people into compliance because it was an administrative, it was,
Are you gonna show us what the licensing looks like? Remember the license that Lloyd was talking about? I mean, if you have to check all the boxes and they only have to, I'd like to see what that license looks like as
the
well.
criteria.
Yeah,
Yeah, if we could.
there's a form that you get that you have to go through. Just for little information, when I did the state, I had one bedroom that didn't have an egress. The window wasn't big enough, so I had to replace the window. And it was like a 3-month process almost by the time I replaced the window to finally get the inspector, because she wasn't local, to come out and look at it and approve it and that type of stuff.
So it'd be nice to see what the state does in a license and then what we're gonna do, just to see the differences on the, what they require and what we're asking.
Mr. Chair, just one other comment. Something to consider, and I don't know how you do it. I don't know if we can or if we can with the limitations on it. But with that, if they're caught violating, and we obviously know that they have scheduled stuff, a cease and desist order too. And maybe they have a 14-day period that they can't rent or whatever. That would then, not only are they having to pay a penalty, but then they're also having to stop all the rentals that they've already scheduled, and that may really bite really hard, even more. I fully agree that if you're going to violate the rules, knowing that they're out there, you should be paying a penalty on it. So,
All right,
I'll go
I think
to-
that covers vacation home rentals.
Yes. Then we're going to,
At least the first phase.
yeah, we're going on to hot topic number 2.
Fine.
So our on-site wastewater treatment systems ordinance, this got overhauled majorly in 2010. And it's under our general district provisions under 204J, but we're proposing to actually add it as its own section. 331, just because there's so much information in it. So our general district provisions will be pretty basic, just saying if you don't have access to public water and sewer, that you need to have an on-site wastewater treatment system. So section 331, a couple things that we're looking at proposing some changes is requiring 2 compartment tanks for homes and businesses with garbage disposal. Rapid City already does this. It is, from an operations perspective, it's actually a good thing. It protects the drain field. The drain field is what costs a lot of money to replace. We consider it somewhat cheap insurance. It's been received by the city. The city's been doing it for a really long time. So that was going to be a recommendation from us. And then the other thing with the operating licenses, right now we require it every 6 years, no matter what. And we require it on sale or transfer or any change in designation. Well, a change in designation is a CUP, plating, variances, anything like that. So if they're changing anything with their property. What we're actually going to propose is going away from the every 6 years and just doing it on change in designation and prior to sale and transfer. Meade County does it that way. Rapid City's still doing it every 6 years. The reason is one, when people are coming in to get a building permit, they would have to get it, that's change in designation. So if they're adding bedrooms or if they're looking at doing additional space, they would require their septics to be pumped and inspected. And then, on sale or transfer. And we have gone through in the past, it's been 12 years now, 13 years. And the number of repairs and things that we're having is really starting to diminish. I think we've gotten a lot of education out there. We got a lot of the older systems have been upgraded and fixed. But we'll still be, have some oversight with them with building permits and change in designations and sale and transfer. And any commercial properties would still be at that 3 years, things that have high usage. Vacation home rentals, I do believe that the committee wasn't necessarily, things like that, where you'd still do
Bless
it. But just kind of going down to that. So that's what the staff is recommending, just because we're not seeing the number of, in the initial, first 6 to 8 years, we saw 30% of the systems had some sort of repair. We're really not seeing that anymore. I think we've we've gotten a lot of those fixed. We've gotten them a lot of upgraded. There's been a lot of education out there. So I do think that, our community has responded to that pretty well. And I know that it was contentious in the beginning, but I think that, now we're in a position where, on sale or transfer, things like that, change in designation, if they're plating, getting building permits, I think it's appropriate to kind of come down a little bit on that requirement. So
Well-
I just to kind of touch base on thoughts.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Drew.
Brittany, on the existing ones, would they be grandfathered in then? And then how does the 6 years apply? So let's say they got licensed 3 years ago. So in another 3 years, so they're exempt to begin with, because they're within the previous 6 years. So what happens when it comes up to the 6 years for them?
They wouldn't have to do anything unless they're requesting a building permit or a
Okay.
conditional use permit. So if they do request those things and they do have a valid operating license, meaning they got it in 3 years, then that would be their valid permit. So if it was outside that 6 years, then they would have to pump and inspect it again. Same with sale or transfer. Most of the realtors, it doesn't really matter to them whether it was in 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they require it anyway.
Follow up on that?
Yep.
So what happens if they transfer, if the ownership transfers in?
They would have to pump and get a new license.
Okay.
So so we're kind of going to, instead of us initiating the requirement, it's going to be them. So if they're asking for a building permit, if they're asking for a CUP, then they would be required to get that license versus us sending out a ton of notices. I feel like, with the number of repairs have gone significantly down, we've accomplished, the intent of what it was, is to get some of these into compliance, get the awareness out there, getting people to understand the maintenance and what they have. So now there wouldn't be a requirement unless they initiate something on their property, whether it be a building permit or a different use or plating, so.
So if, on the sale transfer type issue, then if they only had the one tank, one compartment prior, this would kick in to make,
No, they wouldn't have to do it unless
Oh.
they had to upgrade.
okay,
So anything, so that would just, it would be legal non-conforming, so it would be any new construction moving forward
Okay.
or any replacement.
okay,
So it wouldn't require them like at a pumping or anything. We do that now. So if they add a bedroom or anything, because the tank that they had in at the time was compliant with the ordinance at the time, we're not gonna make them pull them out and put in a two compartment.
thank
It would
you.
just be new construction moving forward.
Well, I really like this, Brittany, because I think Deb, how long, the city started probably 10, 15 years ago with some of the septic inspections, if I remember right. And then, the county did following after that, it seems like. And I think you're right. You're absolutely right. By the time people got their inspections and it was contentious, but once you found out and got some of them repaired out there, now I think, just as you said, it transfers, it's common sense that transfer and sales that you're gonna want it pumped and inspected. So it's expected. So I kind of like the way, I'm glad it come to this point to where they've come in, we've got all the bad ones out there.
Chairman,
Ms. Hadcock.
I'm in agreement for clean water, no matter how we have to get there to a certain extent, to make sure that, you're not polluting the land. I mean, we have a lot of that going on sometimes where people think you're being mean to them. We had a commissioner in that case, but it's about clean water. It's about the future, of what we want our county and our, constituents to understand about what we think is important. So, actually, Brittany is the one that helped the city do, the ordinance on septic. And then Robert Ellis and Mr. Arguello were in compliance or on the team helping Brittany. So then Brittany brought it to the county. So, Brittany knows a lot about this stuff, and is pretty a master in this area as I know. So, I think these are good changes. The flood damage prevention is big. Those areas for riparian and different areas that we've had to clean up, let alone, some of the lakes and stuff that have had issues with septic issues from floodplain and floodways, have been huge. So, and again, I'll give Brittany a lot of kudos because she pushed a lot of this forward. People, and as you guys know, as commissioners, taken a lot of crap for sticking to her guns on this. So it's made a huge difference because now it's less and less. People are understanding what that means for their compliance. Some people never will, but most people do. So,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Roskinek.
so Brittany, it says for unique, unusual, or alternative on-site wastewater treatment systems. One example would just be a holding tank. They can't put the drain field in, so it's just a holding tank. And a holding tank is supposed to hold. I don't know how you inspect those. You pump it out, it's empty. If it's full, it's holding, and then the other ones, some people are going to the mound system right now, and I don't know exactly how a mound system works, but are these the ones that you're talking about?
Not necessarily. Some of them are newer technology that hasn't been, out for a long time, or ATU units. Advanced treatment units a lot of times have to have routine maintenance. If you don't maintain them, they don't work. They're actually worse than just not having one. So those are typically the ones that would fall under there. The time where we'll probably see it the most is under number 3, when the septic isn't sized appropriately, meaning that they have 5 bedrooms. The septic was put in prior to 1994 when our ordinance was in effect. They have a higher usage, so we may require, them to pump more often or get their permits more often. But, that's typically, or commercial systems. Those are typically the only times where I've seen where we've imposed this. A lot of times with the ETU units, they have their own schedule of how they do that. With ATU units now, we require what we call a trash tank, so they do have to have a regular septic tank in front of the ATU unit. That wasn't always the case, but working with some individuals with the University of Minnesota who have done, research on septics for 25 years, that was their recommendation, always making sure that you have that tank in front of the ATU, because the ATU units are pretty expensive. So you want to, it's kind of like the 2 compartment tank. It keeps the solids out of there. It keeps the things operating, more efficiently, which is the intent of it. You see those ATU units like in Canyon Springs is one because of the closeness to the karst areas and the aquifer recharge. So that whole community is on advanced treatment units.
So how do we treat the Jason Eisenbraun that's doing the Rockerville? I haven't looked that close, but he's got some major mound systems. And then
Yes.
Pat Hall across the street, he's doing that commercial. And I'm not sure what Pat's got, but how do those
He has a
fall in?
mound system,
Huh?
or he will have a mound system also.
Okay, so how are those treated? On a certain frequency or?
Those would be on the 6 years right now, unless there's something that comes up that would need them more. To be honest, most of the commercial systems are the ones most of them, in most cases, it's just part of their routine maintenance, especially any ones that are seasonal. They pump them at the end of the season, then they have some downtime and they start their season and they may pump them again. The commercial systems, in most cases, most of our bigger areas, our recreational resorts and things, they have a very good schedule and they maintain them.
So what happened to
Regularly.
the hotel going in the Keystone on the right-hand side that's been closed for 10 years because of the septic system problems?
It's still closed and they don't have a septic.
Okay.
Looks like we're moving on to flood damage prevention ordinance.
Yes. This is another one that has quite a few changes. Our intent with working with the flood damage prevention ordinance, Dustin right now is actually working on updating his emergency management plan. So now would be a good time to do this also because they kind of go hand in hand in most cases. In addition with that, we are looking at working towards being part of the CRS, which is the community rating system, which is actually a benefit for our citizens because if we're part of that CRS, it allows reduced rates for structures that are in floodplains and floodways for their flood insurance. So right now, we're just a community. We're not part of the CRS system. Rapid City is part of the CRS system. I believe Spearfish is, Meade County. So we're going to work towards that. But there's some changes that need to be made to our ordinance. Our ordinance hasn't really been updated since it was originally adopted. So some of the biggest changes is, single-family residences and critical facilities would be prohibited in floodways. And then it clarifies specific requirements for submittals. So right now, our ordinance is pretty general. How we're proposing it is if you're in this type of floodway and you're building this type of structure, this is what's required. Because right now it's pretty vague. So it's difficult for homeowners to understand what's required. And then it kind of puts it on the engineers to kind of decide what they're going to do to submit the information, where now we have it very specific, like if you're building a fence, this is what's going to be required. If you're building a garage or accessory, uninhabited structure, this is going to be required. If you're in an A zone or, things like that. So it's very clear on what's actually required. So when citizens go to an engineering firm, they can say, this is what I need. The other big thing is that it's going to require a elevation certificate post-construction for single-family residences and critical facilities.
And this all has to do with that CRC certification.
CRS program.
And once we get that and people are in compliance, they'd be able to reap in cheaper insurance rates.
Right, and because we are a community, that helps too, but being part of the CRS helps with that too. Right now, we don't have freeboard as a requirement, meaning that you can build at elevation. Most communities require like a foot or 2 feet above elevation. The more freeboard you have, the cheaper your insurance is.
Okay.
So there's different benefits to it. But we're working with Dustin, he's reviewing it, and with the state emergency management to look at it, to be part of the CRS. But those are the 4 biggest changes to it, which are pretty big changes to the ordinance. It went from, like 5 or 6 pages to 18 pages. However, it's more user-friendly for the public and for our engineers because we spend a lot of time, like, what do we need to provide? How do we need to provide it? Because our ordinance is just very vague and it's not clear. So we wanted to clarify that.
Any questions for Brittany?
All right, and then
Development
the
guide.
last thing is, so we worked on putting together this development guide. The intent of it was somewhat to help, our surveyors, engineers, and our public kind of understand the process and the steps on what they, if they want to do certain things with their property, because I know it gets very overwhelming and it gets onerous in understanding all the steps. So we wanted to put something together that could be made available to the public to read, to our citizens, and to our consultants and engineers to kind of understand our processes. We've been working with staff now. We require a pre-development meeting now for all of our requests. So we try to meet with each individual applicant, a one-on-one, to go over what they want to do with their property, how they want to do it, so they kind of understand the process. So this was kind of came out of that, working with the public, so they can kind of understand the process, because sometimes it gets pretty overwhelming.
So on that point, has that come back to cause some concerns? And the reason why I say that is when you meet with some, we've had a couple of cases where when you sat down with the people and you said, well, they told me to apply for this because I don't know what I'm going to do, you know,
Right, so what we try to do is we try to give them all the options.
Okay.
So I know when I meet with them, I can't speak individually, and Jason can speak too, but when I meet them, I said, this is option A, this is option B, this is option C. These all will work. You need to do what's best for you. Because somebody may have a timeline, they may have something, else in play. So we try to give them options, but ultimately we do leave it up to them. Sometimes we will tell them, in the past, planning commission hasn't supported this, or the commission hasn't supported this, things like that, just from, other,
Well, thanks for explaining that, Brittany, because I think sometimes, you know, what, what's explained to them and the way they explain it back to us is they told us. So the way laying out the options, that's good for us to know that you've given them the options and that's the option that they
And-
chosen, but they chose also to say that you told me.
which in theory we did, but we gave them
Yeah.
options. But we also always disclose the fact that we can never predict what 7 people on a planning commission will vote, or 5 people on a commission.
Okay.
We can never predict, and we can't predict if neighbors will come out, because we can look at something and not think, and then, the hearing comes and the room is full of neighbors. So we can never predict those kinds of instances, and the testimony that's provided during that time that could impact a decision. So we do, I know I do when I tell people, like, I can't tell you what the vote will be. I can just tell you that this is the process. These are the things that you need to meet in our ordinance, so.
And I think those pre-development meetings have helped tremendously in the office. It improves the communication between the applicant and the planner. It just tries to answer all those questions before they're asked, and then we're all on the same page moving forward, so that when we're at the podium presenting to the commissions, we don't have any surprises that day. I think that's helped tremendously, and I think the cases that you brought up, the recent ones, were before we were doing the pre-development meetings, so I don't remember too many of those happening since we've implemented those.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
you know, an
Escobar.
example of that, a really good example is, I was driving to the airport and I got a phone call and the guy says, I want to vacate a section line behind my house so I can build this addition. And I said, so I looked into it and planning commission recommended approval. I said, I think this is kind of a no-brainer. I said, you can come to the meeting, but, when planning commission, or I think the planning department, I said, I don't see a problem. Well, it didn't pass the muster. So then said, another alternative might be a variance. And no, there's no guarantee on the variance. But they, like you said, you can give them the alternatives. This would be the way you could go, but there's no guarantee. And then if that don't work, you could try this, but there's no guarantee. So as long as they know there's no guarantee.
Yeah, and we've also, worked with the state's attorney's office on how we advertise. So we're trying to advertise within the confines of the law, but also very generally. Then that way, if one of the commissions decides to make a recommendation that isn't exactly what they ask for. Let's say it's 8 feet instead of 10 feet or 5 feet, it wasn't advertised in such a way that it binds them to that requirement. So we've gone to more general things like that. So that way it does give the commissions a little more leeway with that they're not bound in these boxes. So it does help, the citizens in those instances. They might want 5 feet, but the board feels, eight's enough. Then it doesn't require a re-advertisement and it's just saying that the setback's gonna be less than what's allowed.
Yeah.
And it could be anywhere from 0 to what's allowed. So we've worked with state's attorney to do that too, to help, in those instances. So
Good.
we're not bound by an exact number. So it allows both the board some flexibility.
Well, good.
So, did you want to?
I didn't know if you wanted to.
Oh, and then one of the biggest things, and I'm hoping to eventually incorporate this into the ordinance, we alphabetized all the uses and then went across in the color code and what's allowed in certain districts. Because for me, I'm very visual like this. If I want to know if I want to have an art gallery and I see a color, when I look at a rapid map, I know if my land is that color or not. So, and I've noticed other ordinances in other states and things have this, so we're gonna try to incorporate this into our zoning ordinance, because I feel like it's a little more user-friendly, for the public, to see, what uses are allowed and what types of uses are allowed in different districts. It's just really hard to go to a district in a book and like read them down, so, it's just a kind of a different way to look at things,
And,
so.
Ms. Hadcock.
just kudos to you and your department since you've been running it, and Jason as your assistant and your team. What a big difference in the last few years. Look where we started, or even in the last 5 years, look where we started before we had Brittany in charge and doing what she's doing today. So I'm not into government control in one sense, and the other, some things you have to, otherwise it's public safety. So you guys have done well. And then just the process, you've tried to simplify it for people since we've been here, then adding more things that actually protect the public and basically make it so your job is not to like deny people, but try to find solutions for them, which I like a lot better. Telling people they can't isn't the word. It's, okay, let's see what we can do. So you guys have done great, and your team, you two have shown good leadership in that department, so I appreciate that. And just the changes today, like, I don't always agree, as you guys know, with the changes, but that doesn't mean I don't think you did your due diligence on what you're doing, and you're trying to do the right thing, so that's pretty awesome.
I'll second that. No, you have done, you guys both have done a good job of I think this is what, our second or third work session that we've had, that you brought the information to us, and I think this is an appropriate way to, I was always hesitant, why do we need to do this? Why can't we just meet? But I mean, I think it's good for you guys to express all the work that you're doing and the change that you want, where you want to go, and I think it's working well. And I appreciate it too. I may not always agree with everything, but
Mr. Chair,
And that's why we like to bring them up in these, so we kind of get a feel of where things are before it actually goes to hearing and things, and then being up here and,
Find the bottom line.
so it's nice to get that, feedback, so.
okay. Mr.
so
Ruska.
my question is, how do we get this to the general public? Is this on our website?
Yes, it is online right now. I do actually have some of the flow charts actually on the web. I've given it to all the planning commissioners also, and then, it's available,
If I go to
during-
penco.org, then I
Under
go
planning.
planning and zoning department. And then, when I get to that, can I do the zoning? Can I look at the different zonings in the county and what those, in the description of that zoning?
Yeah, so that'll be in this packet.
Good,
Once
she's
you
gonna
find
show
out
us.
from Rapid Map what your zoning district
Yeah.
is, you can
Okay.
navigate to this.
So if you go to planning, you can see the development guide is actually one of the tabs here, and you can also go to like the front page, and then it, talks about the planning stuff as provided guide to help you understand. So that's in there.
Every committee on there.
Goes there, yep, and the vacation home rental, all of that stuff is on here too,
Nice.
so.
Well, so, there's so much stuff out there and people don't know it's there.
Yeah, and I mean, we try to update
A great job.
our website as much as we can to let them know. One of the big changes, and it happened during COVID, was we started taking credit cards, and it's helped so much with people that don't live here, and that don't, want to come down to the office, frankly, so they can pay for their things online. It's been pretty, even though there's a small fee for it, it has been a success. It's been a good tool. Because if you think of people that live, on the farther ends of Pennington County, paying $2.50 to run a credit card is cheaper than gas to come in and try to pay for it. And it's almost cheaper than mailing it anymore too. So,
Yeah.
so it's been a good, change, in the office. And then I guess when we go into other items, or we'll do the comprehensive plan, we have a couple other things.
So my next question, is this like in a PDF? If I just want to send this to somebody, can you send me that PDF?
Yep, you can download it on here and then I can send you as a PDF
Okay.
too.
Okay.
And then the next one is the comprehensive plan amendments. The biggest thing, we have talked about this, a little bit, is updating our comprehensive plan. I know it was just updated in 2020, but with all of the changes and the development, that's going on and the infrastructure changes, from some of the, utility providers and their master plans, our comprehensive plan, probably needs to be updated. I did speak with, Kip Harrington at the city. We had a different meeting on, Joe's, transportation plan, and we were discussing our comprehensive plan, and the city is actually looking at, updating their comprehensive plan. So Jason and I are gonna try to work with the city in that 3 mile and 1 mile, jurisdiction to see what they come up with in those areas for the zoning districts and try to match ours instead of redoing everything again. Cause I think, they're gonna be looking at the infrastructure, they're going to be looking at that, so, working with them on that, and then those comprehensive plan amendments will come, probably shortly after, so.
So Brittany, how's that work with, when you do the comprehensive plan, we hired a group last time to do ours. If the city's doing theirs, is there a way to piggyback on with that same company and do one complete one, or just they do theirs separate, we do ours separate, and they communicate together?
I think all of those are options. We just need to meet with Sarah Hansel, or Sarah, I think her last name's changed, but she's actually the long-range planner that's working on that with the city. So that's gonna be a matter of sitting down with them and kind of see what their actual plans are, what their RFP looks like, and things. If they're gathering a lot of the same information.
Yeah.
We have talked about, all of these infrastructure plans, because I know that there's, Rapid Valley Sanitary District has plans for expansion in those areas, and that changes our future land uses when you have infrastructure.
Yeah.
Those are huge changes. Even just with the improvements to Longview Road and Anderson Road, those are gonna change those areas a lot, and what those districts would be. I believe that Rapid Valley is doing that, storage, going over the hill into Box Elder, so there's just a lot of different things going on. Joe's working on his transportation plan, the upgrades to Radar Hill Road, so there's just lots of things that are going on in those areas and then to add into that, now you have the airport and their new master plan.
Yeah.
So incorporating that new master plan in the airport, making sure our zoning districts around the airport are gonna match, what the airport is seeing as their future expansion areas too. So there's a lot of things that have kind of changed in the last 2 or 3 years since our comp plan was
Yeah.
completed.
See, that's why I bring that up, because we've had discussions on regional water districts and so forth, and it really, if you stop and think about it, when you're talking about this comprehensive plan, when you got Box Elder, you got Rapid Valley, you got Rapid City, you got Pennington County. I know we're got wider areas outside of that that's involved, but couldn't we all partner in together to do one master? Or am I just thinking way
And I think
way
that,
out.
and that is part of what the MPO does.
Okay.
So I think that goes through what the MPO is doing. The MPO is working with Joe on his transportation plan. So there's some different things through the MPO, I believe, that we can, work together and get that information
Okay.
on. I don't see our zoning districts and our zoning changing that much outside of that 3 mile jurisdiction. Those are the areas where we're really going to see some of the changes, just because of infrastructure and the airport.
Okay.
So,
Any questions?
Yep.
and then other items for consideration, we just had a couple other things. I know Jason has been working on, we're looking at trying to see what kind of building permit, or permit submittal software there is out there. We just have a lot of out-of-state people, consultants and things like that, being able to submit permits and things electronically and being able to upload it into our system.
Nice.
So I know, like, for our consultants, it would be really nice for them just to sit at their computer rather than come down and submit some of this stuff, because every time they do those things, they do charge the citizens for that. So it's kind of a two-way thing. If we can allow them to do something electronically, that, and it will help too with submitting everything so they know what to submit. But we have David working on just looking at some different software to do that, moving forward and being a little more user-friendly. I know Lawrence County does do permits electronically. There's some other counties around us that are
Because you
doing
can
it.
do those document signs that way too, right?
Yep.
That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and it's just, we do have a lot of out-of-state, out-of-area homeowners or property owners. So, and, our consultants and engineers and surveyors, every time they come down to the office, that's time that they take away. So it would be easier if they could submit. A lot of the builders, some of the builders come in, especially in these Murphy Ranch areas or, where Apple Valley coming, they're gonna submit 5 or 10 building permits at a time. So it would be nice to be able to do that electronically, because then it'll save us time, because then we have to take all the paper copies, scan them all in, upload them, where if we have that electronic system, all of that stuff, so it cuts out that kind of inefficiency.
Well, I like that idea because that's the way it's getting to be. It's just like you just said, get in your car and driving halfway across town to do something when you can do it electronically, much easier, more efficient, and you don't saving the paperwork because it's all electronic. It's great.
That's why they make computers.
Yeah. Well, you
Well,
can do it on your,
In
the
fact,
biggest thing is you can do it on your phone. So the guy that's doing the work, he may be out of town, but he can do it over his phone and get it done. You know what I'm saying? Not just in town, but
More efficient.
yeah.
so, and it'll help with our office with efficiency. We just don't have someone that's scanning papers all the time. So, we're trying to get rid of paper, and paper files, and by keeping some of those things online too, eventually we would like to have that access to all those building permits to realtors and consultants and engineers, because right now they have to wait for us to be at work to get that information. If it's accessible online, realtors don't work 8 to 5, they may need to look and see if a building permit at 10 o'clock at night, then they can see these properties and do that research without having to wait for us to be in the office. So there's some different,
Good.
things that we're looking at, trying to make stuff more efficient in the office. Do you have any other? Jason does not like paper.
Jason talks too much.
Office. Huh?
So Jason talks too much.
I know,
Just
right?
efficiency.
It's way too much.
No, so
Okay,
those are just some of the
okay.
projects. If I'm missing any other one,
Mr. Chair,
working on.
Mr. Eskenazi.
Brittany, didn't we kind of discuss that the planning commission could handle the variances and that they wouldn't have to come to the commission?
Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, and that would be, if Megan was here, I would prefer her to speak to that, but there's been some discussion, so.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Glasser.
any conversation about the 40-unit rule, how we're going to put together something to figure out a way to be pretty consistent across the board, or?
What came out, what we were kind of waiting for is the Vacation Home Rental Committee, I think, had a really good suggestion. So I want to see how that goes during Planning Commission. They are looking at evacuation plans for vacation home rentals that are on the 40 unit. Because we can't, state statute does not allow, I think it started July 1 of last year, you cannot require sprinkler systems in single-family residences. So by ordinance, so we can't require, that by ordinance, that by any way as a mitigation. Like we can't require it. So
But there's other means in
there's other
order to not
ways
have to
to,
use a
to
sprinkler.
do, there's other mitigation, ways to do it. The one that the Vacation Home Rental Committee, they wanted an evacuation plan. And I think every situation is different. Every area is different. The topography is different. There's some areas like, you look at Thunderhead Falls, you have 7 bridges. Well, how do you mitigate that? There's just different things in different areas, fire. In some of the areas I know, I can speak to one that I know of, like Clarkson. All of the neighbors up there, they kind of have their plan. They all communicate. They know they work together. I know that the ones that have vacation home rentals up there, they communicate to their renters and things. So there, some areas are already taking their own steps to take care of those issues. So. But those are the biggest ones, is the mitigation requirements. But when we were doing the floodplain ordinance changes, there's a couple entities that require like evacuation and mitigation plans, which I had sent over to Dustin, and I want him to look at to see if that's actually, for a 40-unit rule, if that's something that, from his perspective. Because really, when we met with some of the emergency personnel about the 40-unit rule, that 40-unit rule kind of came, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, comes from what reasonably, how they mobilize people that they can contact, how they can get, people out. It's like a timing and a number type people, and that's kind of where that general 40 came from. That's kind of what I understood from it, is, what's the max that they can manage as far as notification and things like that. So that's kind of where that came from.
Mr. Chair,
So.
so relative to the 40-unit rule, there's so many variables. The density, how far back you're going, and the access, the location. If you've got your 40 units, but and you're getting access off of a particular corridor, but you're located right at that corridor almost. That's not the same as if you're 3 miles down in a high density. So there's a lot of variables that I think we just have to look at
And that's why
on
it's
an individual
difficult.
case.
It's not a one size fits all. It's
No.
just a very difficult way. It's,
I-
in most cases, I talked to other counties, directors at other counties, like in Lawrence County, they just don't allow it. They haven't allowed it, so it hasn't been an issue, but, well, we don't have that option right now. We're already there. We have to, figure a way forward. So that's.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, because that has been something that's been on our radar for quite a while. I guess my thoughts on that is that I keep thinking about, I've had conversations with Don Burnett in the back past about the 72 flood. Back then, emergency management, was TV, radio, and landline. Nowadays, do we have cell service to these places? Do we can get a message out to, things have just changed so much. Also, as far as notifications, that, and the size of the roads, are they wide enough? Topography, I mean, there's a lot. I wish there was a one size fits all question for this, but I guess that's why we're here, is to help make those decisions.
And we do have some proposed ordinance amendments kind of going through and working with Megan, so we are working on them. It's just difficult, like I said, because it's hard, because you have flood, you have fire, you have tornado. I mean, you have all different types of things, and then you have some roads that have topographical challenges. You have some that are, you could drive across a field and get out and you'd be fine. There's just
Yeah.
very different scenarios, so it's just,
But, the one good thing about the 40-unit rule, folks, is that it brings it to our attention. So it's not just administrative or keeps going and we have to keep an eye on those areas, so.
you have anything else? No, I don't have anything else unless
I have
the
something.
commission does.
Ms. Hadcock?
So we had brought up at the planning commission too, the notification 24 hours before. I know Megan is looking into legally what that has to be submitted as constituents or as planning commissioners or commissioners. What is the best process in order to get information and make sure that you can have your due diligence? Because people are starting to hand you stuff at the dais. If it's a picture or something, there's like a two-way street almost, because me and Jason had this discussion on, what's her name from Vacation Home?
Dessel.
Dessel. So Dessel handed us a couple things. One thing was pertinent because it's when they had the vacation home rental. We didn't have that information that was added, and that they should have done the transfer. It should have been done by October 17th, I think is what she handed us. And then that they were operating already without a license. And the other was pictures. So the pictures are good and I can look at the pictures, but starting to read stuff on the dais, for me, if it's maybe like a quick blurb, it's different than some people hand us 2, 3 things with, they forgot to submit this stuff and they forgot to submit that. What I'd like to know what the rule is. Is there a state ruling? And I know Megan and those guys are looking it up, because to be fair, should it be continued if you have that much process? Does the planners just decide, well, I got enough information, I don't need to read that? But there could be something pertinent in the information that someone's handing you that might have you change your mind based on facts and information. So for me, I really don't know. I'm going to tell you, after we discussed it for 24 hours, did we discuss it with the packet? We just let them do that and then we decide up on the dais? I mean, is that fair to the applicant to decide on the dais that we have pertinent information to shut their stuff down without them knowing, because they didn't get to read it? So people are handing us stuff and showing us stuff that the applicant or the person that's on the other side that we are making that decision on is not seeing. And we might be basing that decision on that, and they had no idea that was happening. Plus, to get it on the fly, back it up with the facts, right? I don't think that's fair and just to the applicant. So then, like I said, then there's stuff that are just pictures and things that it ain't a big deal. We just move it forward. So how do you distinguish, and are we making a rule on that, or we just let people hand stuff the day of?
Okay, I think, who was it, Gary?
Even at the legislative level, at the committee that Ron and I was at yesterday, they invite you to provide information and pictures as you're getting ready to testify, or even after the testimony.
Right.
So I mean, even at the state level, they accept it. So
They accept it, but are they making the decision right there? Are they already, like, once they accepted it, we're accepting all this and then we're going to committee and we're figuring this out?
well, the option they made the decision yesterday. I don't know if anybody actually submitted any last minute information on the issues that they were talking about. But they have the option that they're meeting probably at least twice a week. So they could delay their formal action, until the next meeting. So, but it happened, but I just noticed that it happened there too, so.
But you're right, Gary, because the delay then we're delaying someone 2 weeks because
Yeah.
there might be pertinent information. So that's why I said I'm kind of stuck with what is the rule, what is fair and just, and do we just keep doing it on the fly? I don't know.
Well,
Chair.
I may respond to Deb real quick, because I think I was the one that made that comment about maybe continuing it. I'm just going by from our past experiences of how it's happened. We asked that it get turned in 24-hour in advance so we can have time to review it. But quite often we get stuff that does come up. It's up to the commissioners to accept it at that point in time or not.
Right.
But we want, if it's a book like this and you walk up and I'm making a decision, I'm going to tell you, I don't have time to go through it. If it's something simple that they got their certifications that they were waiting for, and it's a simple page, darn rights, I'm going to accept that. But I think that's why part of us as a commission, we have a standing rule that says at least 24, but every case is going to be a little bit different. And I think that's where we make the call up here at that point in time. If it looks like we need more time to review it, then we continue it on.
But what about the planning commissioners?
Yeah.
When we're getting information on the fly and the planners are not knowing that you had that information or that they can respond responsibly, do they need to say, well, we have to continue this because I didn't know anything about this information, it might be pertinent to this? Does that make sense? Because they also need to do their job. So when information is coming up on the fly, they didn't know or they don't know what you're talking about. That is something for me when I'm watching some of the planners and I go, I had no idea. Then they can't do their job respectively either. So whether it be a constituent or a planning commissioner or a commissioner. So I just want to be respectful to their job as well. Trying to get the right information and do the right thing is their job as well as ours. So it goes a two-way street. And that's why at the planning commission, we talked about it as well. What makes it fair and just to be able to make a good decision? Well, they said too, maybe, if we have to read a bunch of information, that maybe we don't, but I think it's by right as well as the planner to say, can we continue this? I didn't have this information, and we respect that
They
as
can
well,
do
so.
that too.
Mr. Chair.
Travis.
I think I agree with that. I think the staff, if we get handed something, they should also have a copy of it so they can maybe peruse it. And if they feel that they need that extra time, a lot of times I notice we do peruse that and we say, well, I think we want to give staff extra time, or we'll ask staff questions on it. And then we usually do tend to continue it ourselves, but if staff picks up on something and it sounds like we're gonna make a decision, but you feel like it'd be better, I would hope that y'all would come up and let us know so that we can say, well, let's continue this, so we can look into that a little bit better. One thing I wouldn't want to do is I wouldn't want to put hard and fast that if you give us something in writing, that we're going to continue it, you're automatically going to continue it, because then we would set ourselves up to every meeting. Someone who doesn't want something, they'd always submit stuff, and then we would always be forced to continue. So I wouldn't want us to ever consider, well, if you submit stuff, then we're going to have to continue it. I don't think we are, but just kind of putting that out there that, we'll take whatever, maybe we peruse it, maybe we determine if it's got merit, and then make a decision whether we continue or not.
I think you're absolutely right. It's you have that option to continue at all times
Well, what
if
is
you don't
that?
have the information, but
And what is the open meetings law? Is there a law for what you can do and what you can't do on the day of a meeting? What has to be submitted, meaning that makes it so the public should be informed on before a decision is made? Does it have to be written somewhere or whatever that we're changing it because or whatever? That would be something to look into as well.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Drew.
I think as a commission, what we have to do is we have to trust the departments that they've done everything that they're legally required to do in order to give notice. Because what we have is people coming in and saying, I wasn't aware of this, or I didn't know about this until 2 days ago when my neighbor told me that this was happening and so forth. But if everything was done legally as far as publication and so forth, that's not our issue. I feel bad for them if they didn't know about it, but at the same time, they do have some responsibility to keep track of what is happening. Some of them we know have received actually written correspondence from us, and they still come up and contend that they didn't know anything about it. And I can see how people do that by scanning through something, and they get it 2 weeks ahead of time, and they think, well, I'll deal with that later, and they never get back to it and so forth. But I think as long as our departments are doing everything legally to give that notification, I don't think that we need to carry the concern of saying, oh, this person didn't know about it, so this information they're providing us now is pertinent because of the fact that they didn't get notified.
Well, how about Holly though, Gary? Like Ellsworth decided to give a packet to Holly 24 hours before, actually the day of the commission. So we should be able to take that and say, Ellsworth, Holly should take it, put it on the dais for us. If I'm correct, Holly. And then Holly's okay Holly, can you come out here for just a sec? I know you're doing I know you have some discussion on this, Holly, for trying to do a packet and trying to make a good decision for us of what we should and shouldn't have. So maybe explain what you're explaining
Yeah, I
to
mean,
me
that
before.
situation with Mr. Ellsworth, he showed up with significant amount of information that was not provided to the board ahead of time. I mean, it was 15 minutes before the meeting. And so it was at that point that I said, we're not going to accept this. And he decided to withdraw from being on the agenda. In open meetings laws allow a board to add items at the point of the agenda being approved. That is at that moment with no public comment, or I'm sorry, no public notice. That is allowed by law. We typically don't ever do that because we want to be in spirit of open meetings and be in full transparency and make sure that everyone who has an interest has the ability to review it ahead of time and be informed and be involved if they so choose. But from an open meetings perspective, you can add items at that moment. That's why all of your agendas say proposed. They're proposed until you adopt them, and then that's what you follow. But for Mr. Ellsworth, none of you had seen any of the information that he was coming to present. So A, that's not fair to the board. B, that's not fair to anybody else in the public. C, that's not fair to staff, that you come in and nobody's prepared. So we make that decision that, no, we're not going to allow this. If you would have come in with one updated slide to a presentation that you guys have already seen, well, yeah, I mean, why would we delay it another 2 weeks when it could be viewed as a simple change? So we've got that line of being in full spirit of following the open meetings laws versus the hard technical line of we have violated it.
Right, so the technical line is that you're having something on the agenda added that is not already going to be talked about. His stuff wasn't on the agenda. His packet wasn't about what was already on the agenda. It wasn't about the minutes or anything else. He wanted something to talk about that wasn't on there before.
That's my understanding. It was just a lot of information that you guys hadn't seen. And he had already submitted his information and it was in the packet, but there was more. There was new. And when there's 15 minutes before a meeting's supposed to start, staff doesn't have time to look at that. We can't go through and see what it is
Neither can the
to make
public.
sure that it's, yeah, appropriate. That if he's gonna come
That's
in and
kind of-
present on something completely different that's not on the agenda, that is an open meetings violation for the board.
So that's why I'm saying it's hard to determine if it's 24 hours or if it's, go ahead and hand it during the meeting, and then Ellsworth could hand it to us to the meeting and say, this is what I'm gonna talk about at the next meeting with his minutes. I mean, so we could read it. I don't know what that's supposed to look like. I'm just saying, when people aren't prepared for, some of this stuff, and we're commissioners or we're staff, I think it should be, and planning commissioners, it should be, at least 24 hours. The public, maybe not, they can hand us stuff and we continue, but I think as professionals and people that are doing this, it should be submitted timely.
And that's what we've practiced.
Mr. Chair, that's
Mr.
Ellsworth is one thing, but then we have a lot of situations where we're in my district where there's variance in different requests, and how many times have we said we can't make a decision today? We're gonna do a site inspection, so we're gonna delay it, so everybody's on the same page, so planning and zoning's on the same page, the commissioners are on the same page, then we can make the right decision. So there are gonna be continuances if we wanna do this right.
Absolutely.
But Ron, let's be up straight. Sometimes, some of your stuff that you're submitting, the planning, director and the planning, department does not have the information, doesn't have the stuff that you had taken pictures on before. So to be fair and just, they're asking us as commissioners if we can set that up or meet with them so they have an understanding of what we want, not you personally, but all of us. When you have information that you're going to take pictures or you're going to do stuff, they actually will go with us if we need to, or submit them timely so they can look at them and at least have a good conversation with you, not on the dais. So we don't have to continue stuff because they didn't get it. So it wasn't just for us, it's sometimes the planning commissioners as well, so.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just timing, because I don't know how many calls I get on a weekend, and the meeting's on Tuesday, so to me, if we're gonna do it right, we need to continue it if we're all gonna be on the same page, because I just can't do it on a Monday and then Tuesday's the meeting.
Well, the way, to me, I think Holly explained it best. You know, if it's a simple change or pertinent. You know, a lot of times when we get recommendations from our staff of what, and if me as a commissioner, if I seen something, found something out different from the recommendations from the staff, I'm gonna ask for a continuance. Because it's different from that, so that way I have time to sit down with you and go, this is what, more information that came to me different from what you got, or maybe you need to explain to me how you got to where you, that's my perspective on this. Stuff that's gonna, we're gonna have stuff that's gonna come to us that's pertinent to the applicant's information or something the day of that could be, I think that's a judgment call that day,
Well, some of it's
quite
just
frankly.
communication with your staff, with your
Yeah.
employees, what's going on and why you can't do it, or maybe they have a better suggestion than just 24 hours a day or continuing someone that's been continued 3 times. So a lot of times this communication with your staff in the morning or that Saturday or Sunday that you, Brittany or Jason has taken, I said, I have to go out Monday morning, that they know you're going out Monday morning. I have to take pictures, or I'm taking pictures on Saturday. I know Jason has came out on Saturday and taken pictures and stuff. That's not his job in one sense, but he wants to make sure that we're covered for those people to be continued. That's not their job, but if they feel like that, at least give them the notification what you're doing ahead of time so they can explain, or maybe you won't even have to. Maybe they have the pictures or the stuff in order to do it, or Holly might even have it. You can communicate to her as well. So some of it's just communication for our part. That's all I'm asking. I don't want to beat anybody up. Just communicate with your employees on what you're doing and your department head, and they might find better solutions so you don't have to go and do it yourself too, so.
Thanks, Deb. I think we got a good understanding on this, right? So we're sticking with the 24 as we discussed, and I think you know which direction we're going. Okay. Anything else for the better of the commission? Seeing none, I look for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Drew, second by Laster. Any discussion? None. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, folks.